Curious George, the curious little monkey. Here he comes, as happy as can be. Curious George, the curious little monkey. Why is he curious? Well, let's go and see.
Curious George and the maple syrup. It's maple syrup time, George, said the man with the yellow hat. Let's go to the country and get some more for our pancakes. They got into their little blue car and went off to a farm near the forest. Mr. McIver was standing by the barn. "This is good weather for maple syrup," he said. "But it's bad for the cattle. They can get stuck in the mud." George looked around for the maple syrup, but he did not see any. "Look in the woods, George," said Mr. McIver. "You'll see plenty of syrup there." "But remember," said the man with the yellow hat, "don't get into trouble." George walked down the trail. He saw some trees that had buckets hanging from their trunks. What were the buckets for? George was curious. He climbed up a tree to take a good look. Someone had made a hole in the tree, and the syrup was dripping into the bucket. So that's where maple syrup comes from. George tasted it. It was delicious. He tasted some more. Then he helped himself to a whole bucket. And another. And another. Maybe he shouldn't have had so much syrup. Now his tummy hurt. A while later, Mr. McIver's children, Brian and Mary, came down the trail to empty the buckets. "Look," cried Mary, "someone took all the syrup. There's nothing left." "It must have been that monkey up there," shouted Brian. "Let's get him." George was scared. Suddenly, there was a loud mooing sound. A cow was stuck in a mud hole. Help was needed, and fast. Luckily, there was a tractor near a barn. George ran over, jumped on the seat, and blew the horn as loud as he could. The children came running over. "It's him again," cried Mary. "Now George is fooling around with the tractor." "Don't worry, I'll catch him," shouted Brian, and tried to grab him. But George jumped off the tractor, ran to the mud hole, and jumped on the cow. The cow mooed again. "What's that?" Mary asked. "Sounds like a cow in trouble," Brian said. "Maybe that's why George blew the horn." "Let's get Dad," shouted Mary, and they ran back to the house. Meanwhile, the cow was sinking deeper in the mud. George ran back to the barn, found a heavy rope, and ran back to the cow. Then he tied the rope around the cow's horns. Mr. McIver came over just in time. "Throw me that rope, George," he shouted. Then he tied the rope to the tractor. The children cheered. "Thanks, George," said Mr. McIver. "Hooray for George! He's great," Mary shouted. "George, you shouldn't have taken all that maple syrup, but you made up for it by saving our cow." "George, I've been looking all over for you," said the man with the yellow hat. "Let's go home." And that's just what they did.